Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for listening. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing an artist, visionary, community cultivator, director of community and culture at OpenWorks. Please welcome April Danielle Lewis. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We held me trying to be nice and cool and inviting. Now it's down to the hard questions, all the fire. So for starters, tell the fine folks who are undipped about your background and just describe your work and where you grew up. Because I saw something in there about, your early background that really got my tattoos kind of moving. I have a few interesting tattoos we'll talk about maybe. We're going.
So I guess, as far as where I'm from, my family's from Baltimore, but my dad was in the Army. So I grew up kind of in my sort of formative childhood years living in a variety of countries overseas. I was born in Okinawa, Japan, and I lived in Augsburg, Germany, and then in my teen years, I lived in Panama City, Panama. And then whenever we were living in the United States, my dad's job was, he worked at NSA. So my parents had a house in Severn, Maryland. So we would kind of like go overseas for a couple of years and then come back to our house. I lived on Fort Meade for a little while. So but I've been living in Baltimore since I moved back in 2017. And I've been living in Baltimore City since 2006. So I'm pretty much from here. I kind of grew up here, but got to get away a little bit. And so that's like where I'm from. And then how you asked me how I how did I get into art making?
Yeah. How did you get into art making ultimately? Like any of those early experiences and having that travel background, being like away and having different countries you've lived in. How did that kind of contribute to your background as an artist, as a creator?
Yeah. So when my grandparents my grandmother was a hat maker, and she made like church lady hats, and had a shop that was in downtown Baltimore, on Howard and Mulberry. And whenever we were like living in the States, my mom worked for my grandmother and I would go to work with them. So, kind of like preschool or like we were, like my preschool years, like when I was in half day, kind of like kindergarten situation, like I would get picked up and then come into work with my mom, and folks would just kind of like try to keep me busy. And so in the store that my grandmother worked in, there was like a staircase that went to a second floor that was used for storage, and kind of underneath that they put like a pallet of like blankets on the ground, and like that was kind of like my chill corner to like get away from everybody. And they would like give me scraps of fabric, and I was able to do whatever I wanted to that space. I could color on the walls. I could like glue things onto the walls. Like the folks that worked for my grandmother would sometimes like sneak in like a little piece of like the fancy like string of rhinestone material or like sequins and things like that, and kind of like sneak those things to me, and I would like glue them up on the wall underneath the staircase and on the bottom of the stairs, and kind of created this like little magical cavern. And I think that there's certain things I do sort of like performance and installation art things most commonly. And I really love kind of creating a space and an environment. And I think that sort of exploring space and materials in that way when I was a child, and kind of like keeping myself entertained. Definitely there's like a gratification when I like do something that fills a space, especially if I can attach something to the ceiling and to a wall. Oh, that's just like, I'm in a happy space when I'm creating, and like using kind of like, exploring in space in that way. So, Yeah. So I feel like that is sort of like my earliest sort of introduction to art making, but also the next door neighbor to my grandparents' store was like a frame shop.
Mhm.
And so they treated everything that I made as like precious. So they would get like my drawings mounted on foam core and like framed and like actually like in the frame shop. A lot of the samples of frames, they would use like my like crappy like preschool artworks as the examples. And so I just sort of, there was like always kind of like a celebration or around the things that you make. And I always like enjoyed kind of collecting things and making other things out of stuff. So, and I still feel like I do a lot of collecting things and repurposing it in like art projects that I've done in the past and things like that. So those ways that I was exploring like the world and materials when I was 4, I'm still exploring the world and materials like 4 decades later. So, you know.
That's great.
Yeah.
Like, I immediately started thinking, when you were talking about having like the work that you were doing viewed as like being precious. It's like, yeah, we're going to put those up there. And that's reference. I remember my grandmother used to do that. I was one of those kids. I had maybe the desire to be a comic book artist when I was a kid. And it was always this cultivation of, here's some drawing books. Here's how to draw this. I was like, why are these Rob Liefeld books? His proportions are terrible. But, just getting that. And I would like go over my grandmother's house and she'd be talking to her friends or have you. And it's like, who did that picture right there? That's like on the wall. It's like, oh, my grandson did. Just that pride and that kind of, this is your thing. So I had a different version of it, but I definitely kind of get what you were describing there. And I think about that warmly too. So what I read, and maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong here. So you had some experience working with your mother, and now when you were younger, and now you're working with your daughter. Yes.
So I have a 22-year-old daughter, and she's been, I had her like kind of right after I graduated from high school. And she was sort of like my sidekick. And like if I did not go to, I went to Towson University and got a degree in art. And so I kind of like waited until she got to first grade before I really like got into like going to school so I could be at school while she was at school. But there were a lot of times that like she'd have to come back to the studio and like I'd set up space for her to kind of like have a chill space or things to tinker with while I got my work done. And that kind of became the routine. And I really feel like, that was sort of normalized for me that like I went to work with my parents and like just figured out how to entertain myself. Just so happened to be in a creative space. And so it's kind of the same thing happened with my child. She ended up, she's far more talented than I am. And she went to the Baltimore School for the Arts. And so kind of like there was a certain point, I think, when she was probably maybe in her like sophomore year, I'm like, I really leaned on her a lot to kind of be sort of like my studio assistant. Like I could trust her to kind of like, because she'd been around and like helping with things, all through all these years, like, she's got like a more skilled and can control and draw better than me. So I would be like, here's the thing. We need 500 of these. Like, I need you to get to work, filling all this in. So, but it's been like a great sort of like, I think form of bonding. And we work really well together because we've been doing it for such a long time.
That's great. That's great to hear. Like, I don't have that same experience. But I think in doing this podcast, it's something like creative. And I think when you're doing something really for a long time with someone, especially if they're the person that's really close to you, like a child, have you, it's like, this is very, like emotional stuff, like creative stuff is emotional to me, I think. So it's like, it has to be that connection. It has to be that because things are happening right there and you got to have a good working relationship ultimately. And I just think when it works, it just pauses like, you get me. You know what I'm doing. You get it. Hell yeah. So, yeah, please.
I was going to say, I most recently did a project with Neighborhood Design Center and the Signal Station North project called We're Here. And it was about visibility. Basically, I was making these like bunting flags made out of reflective material. And so I did some community art workshops to get words or input from like community folks, and then made these like flags that are hanging up outside at the Why Not Yacht. But it was a thing where like I'm working like well into it because I also have a full-time job. I absolutely need a studio assistant at this point. And we're getting to crunch time, and like my child is up with me until, I say my child, but my adult child is up with me until like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And now her partner's also been reeled into this. And like, the three of us are up working, and I'm like, I'm glad that we've brought you into the family, and that it's a part of the thing that now I have 2 studio assistants that will sleep in my house and eat my food in exchange for knowing that like you might have to be up until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning with me working. So
it's one of the coolest versions of a barter system right there. Like, look, I need to. So I guess what you were describing there kind of kind of transitions actually, or segues into my next like question. Speak on this, and this is probably my shortest question on here, by the way. How does art and change intersect?
I think that change is. I think that's a really great question. I feel like art allows you, in order to change something, you need to be like willing to let go, willing to understand what's on the other side of a shift. And a lot of times art can be a great vehicle to allow you to explore the possibilities, to think about the other side, or to maybe like approach problems or things that need to be different with like a fresh set of eyes or a different perspective. Art often allows you an opportunity to be vulnerable, to kind of like get to the root or essence of a thing. And sometimes that can be inspiring to allow a perspective to change. I feel like a thing that in yoga is one of my yoga instructors would say all the time is like, you really like a change is as simple as changing your mind. But that's also like a very difficult thing, like to tell yourself that you can put your body into a shape and all you have to do is change your mind about that to get there. It's really allowing kind of like a release of what and kind of an exploration of the unknown. And I feel like that is what art is, in a lot of ways.
I am going to steal that and wrap it in. Art is exploration. Just going that way to make myself sound like I'm smarter than I am. Look, I was start being in these art talks. It's like, yeah. So as the great Danielle Lewis once said, I would have said just like that with those dulcet tones. So going back into your work, because I was not good. I didn't really get too deep into your work, but I think we can do that now. Are there any specific topics or subjects, themes that you return to regularly within your art? If so, what are they, and why do you think you return to them?
I think like maybe the thread that is in a lot of projects that I do is that there's like labor and maybe this isn't always a thing that stands out to the viewer or person that's experiencing, but I do repetitive things to me, where the process to me becomes a lot about the work and about labor. And I think that as a mother, as a wife, as a Black woman who's like working in an organization, I think that I think about labor a lot. I think about emotional labor. I think about like the actual work of doing work. I think about like, and I feel like that theme kind of comes for me. Like when I make a piece that is where I'm doing the same thing over and over again, I can get into a flow, and it allows me to sort of like, oftentimes in my process of making, be very, it can almost turn meditative. But I think that that's me developing a relationship with labor, and exploring my relationship with labor. And but I do think that also like race, my experience of being a Black woman, and that sort of like, my experience of like living in this city, is definitely like a huge thing. Like my sort of like personal identity, are things that kind of, I think come up in the work. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I had this conversation on an episode that has not debuted yet, but I had this conversation with a photographer, and we were just talking about like when someone's experiencing art, experiencing someone's work, and they want to like pull out what they pull out, but then don't take into account like maybe their background sometimes, like almost like, oh yeah, this is I'm a Black photographer, so definitely my Blackness is within this. Oh yeah. No, we just want the photography. It's like, well, the Blackness is baked in. It's the secret ingredient. It's the spice to it, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm very, like, and even in doing this, and when this got started, like really big during the pandemic, I would have people hit me in the DMs. Like, why'd you bring this person on? Or it's a lot of people who were very pro Black. It's like, well, as you can see, it's a 6'4", 300 pounds of Blackness right here. And it's baked in. And just even kind of thinking about this, and maybe this ties, I don't know, but I have been really getting into audiobooks, and I've been kind of playing with the like 48 Laws of Power and different stuff in that Robert Greene vein. But one of the things that I talk about is like almost normal for me when I do a bunch of interviews. It's like I'll have 10 interviews in a week, and I'm just like, all right, let me just go through this. Let me set this up, feel organized. And that feels normal to me. And then I'll just mention it to people, like just in conversation, not in a, hey, I'm so busy, but in a way of, this is what I'm doing this week. And people are like, wow, you're just so busy. And I was like, oh, it's just normalized for me. This is just part of me doing my work.
Yeah. I definitely feel that. I also am one that is, people often say, oh my God, you are so busy. And I'm just like, but I don't know what to do with myself if I'm not doing all these things.
It's one of those things. I talk to different artists, and they'll talk about, and maybe this, I want to get your take on this. If we talk about like, if I'm not doing something, it is a bad week for me. It's like, look, I got to draw something every day. I got to come up with something. I have a notepad for an idea. If I'm not moving the needle in any degree towards artistic creation, even if I'm supposed to take time away, I don't feel good. Is that how it goes for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, for me, I spend a lot of time. So I guess this is also a huge theme in my artwork, is kind of community stuff. But like, I feel like I volunteer and spend a lot of my time kind of working on like community projects and things like that. It makes me feel connected. It makes me feel like I belong. It makes me feel ownership of the place that I live in, and sort of like empowered in my own life. And I can't imagine what I would be like if I didn't do those things and spend my time in that way. And I feel like it's very much like a part of like who I am. And I may have been conditioned to always feel like that. And that's some like deeper stuff to like pull back layers on. But yeah, I don't want to like sit in front of my thumbs, and I don't want to like, veg out and like watch a thing on the screen. I feel like, there's all of this up here constantly moving around. And I need to kind of like get those things out of me. I need to be doing things.
Yes. I was going back through I was like rereading the questions, because I obsess over them. I was like, I don't want to ask a stupid question or a question that's like out of date. So I'll go back through, and I was going back through the questions for you, and I had wrestling, like a wrestling match playing in the background. I was like, I should be watching this. Like, nah, I need to work. You got work to do. Type. So yeah. So I got two more questions before I get into rapid fire. So I really like the white guilt confessional. And sometimes this is a thing where I don't know if someone actually is around when other people are viewing their work. But did you get any of that insight, like any of those memorable responses to the work, or any work that you've had on over the years that's really kind of resonated with people, and they're like, "Look, I got to tell you about this work you did." Did you have anything that comes to mind?
So with the white guilt confessional project, basically I built I built a confession booth, and I went inside and I asked people to like, if they were harboring any guilt, and to sort of like talk about the guilt, and then I asked them to absolve themselves. And the whole idea behind the white guilt confessional was that, like, white guilt, or sort of like the concern with, all of these sort of like self-involved things, like get in the way of actually doing the work of undoing racism. And when you worry about, like, how you said that thing, or you are worried about, how it looks that, you have, a better off situation than, someone else, or that you are receiving privilege, and that you use it in the world. And it's like, well, when you spend your time focusing on that, you're not spending your time focusing on actually letting go of things. So I got to, like, sit and listen to people talk about all of those kinds of just, like, privilege a lot. And that was, just the act of doing that was very draining. I did this I did this project a couple of times, but the second time that I did it was at Artscape, and it was over the course of 3 days. And so for 3 days, I had people sit down and kind of talk about their privilege, and that was just really hard to, like, listen to them. There was no back and forth dialogue. Like, I didn't want anyone to feel like a Black woman was absolving them of anything, because really it's not about that. It's about, like, you letting go of your own stuff and you managing your own stuff, so that we can all move forward. There were a lot of people that I think about are probably people that are in the comments of, like, Fox News posts on Facebook, who would sit in my chair just to tell me about myself, about how I'm perpetuating racism by, like, having people think about racism or white guilt, or how dare I try to make them feel bad, or, like, that they should feel guilty about anything. There are lots of angry people, or Black folks that didn't know that there was a Black woman inside, that would sit down in the chair and, like, thought that, like, there would be a white person inside, and then give them a piece of their mind. Yeah. And I'm just like, okay, be angry. Yes. Channel that anger in a way. But yeah, so I think just, for me, the thing that, really stood out was that there was labor there. And it was very, very draining. Even though I wasn't actually actively, like, doing a physical thing, just receiving all of this information over and over again was a lot. I did it twice. The first time I did it was was actually inside of the Copycat building, which is a artist sort of like live workspace. And a lot of the people that sat down in the chair were also artists. And most of them were white, and people, like, really, I think the setting, because it was kind of in a more familiar space for a lot of people, like, in that instance, people opened up and really kind of, like, used it as a confession booth. And, someone admitted that they were a sex worker and that their family didn't know about it, and that they care, so, like, really, I did not get any sort of, like, vulnerability like that when I did it in a more public space. But it was just, kind of like receiving all of that in both instances. It was a lot to hold. I did a lot of, like, maybe slightly recognizing a voice. I couldn't see the people and they couldn't see me. And then there was where I'm, like, wondering, was that somebody that I knew that told me that, but I wasn't trying to judge or anything like that. And I was literally, like, when someone would get up, another person would sit down. And so I didn't really have a ton of time, but just, I took in a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, that's an empath's nightmare. Yeah, like I don't know, like I'm starting to become more aware because I think by proxy, at least my standpoint, by proxy, you just kind of get an idea of doing these interviews and understanding where people come from and just getting a notion that there's a fair amount of vulnerability. So to your point, it's like if I'm sitting there doing like 5-6 interviews, it's like, look, I can't do anything else today. I've heard about this person's sad life, but their great art that's being driven by this sad life. I was like, this is a lot. I was like, man, I need a bagel. I need something fat and tasty to make me feel better. I need to eat my feelings. So the last question I have before I get into rapid fire, and I promise the rapid fire questions.
I'm nervous about the rapid fire.
They're not going to be draining. They are not going to be draining. I assure you. Yeah. Because I got to be a better person. So tell me about OpenWorks. I went there a little while back for it was an event that the Vibe Room was having. And I went there. I was like, yeah, who's the person to talk to? I literally went out like that, like really aggressively. I was like, here you are, sir. I was like, yeah, exactly. So tell me about OpenWorks and the importance of spaces like it within the maker community in Baltimore.
Yeah. So OpenWorks is a nonprofit makerspace. A makerspace, we like to say, is kind of like the YMCA, but for people that make things. So you can have a membership to OpenWorks, and we have professional level tools and equipment that you can use. So instead of like you go to the gym and play on their basketball court or swim in their pool, you can come here and use our wood shop with like professional top of the line, like tools and equipment. We have digital fabrication. So we have like laser cutters and CNC routers. We have a full metal shop where you can do welding, and we have CNC plasma cutter that will like cut your digital designs out of sheets of steel. We have 3D printing. We have an industrial textiles lab, electronics, and then digital media. And then we have software for like all the design software and things like that. So you can have a membership and come in and use all of that stuff. And we also have studio spaces where about half of our members that have studio spaces are also small businesses. So they base their businesses out of OpenWorks and kind of use our shops to fabricate things that they sell. And then there are other artists and hobbyists and things like that. But most importantly, we are located in the Greenmount West neighborhood, and we are a community resource. So we've been real intentional about building relationships with our surrounding neighborhoods. We're in Greenmount West. We work closely with the Johnston Square community, which is just kind of to the east and south of us, and then have relationships with a lot of organizations in Barclay also. And so we like host all of their community association meetings here. We have a coffee shop in our lobby that's got, it's free and open to the public. We just reopened finally the coffee shop this week after COVID. So it's back. You can come in and grab coffee or hang out and check out use our Wi-Fi and all that stuff. It's also a great place to have a meeting. So we have like resources, and we're kind of a hub for people and creatives. And so I think one of the really amazing things that has come out of this space is the relationships and the community. We've surveyed our members several times, and we've got literally, the top of the line, like table saws and dust collection system, or like a digital embroidery machine that's, top of the line. And the most commonly reported item of value, not item, but thing of value in our community is actually the people. So like learning from each other, being inspired by each other. There's been like lots of collaboration and like beautiful, like cross-pollination, like businesses that have formed by two people kind of like working in the shops, next to each other, and people helping each other out. We have like parents that do like child trading, sharing, mostly pre-COVID, but like just this community that is built around a practice. I mean, if you're doing this as you're trying to start up a business and you have a full-time job, it's really easy or it's a lot easier to have kind of the support of the community to help you get going rather than sort of like being a lone person in the world trying to, and then we try to exist as a platform. So being a space for events like the Vibe Room to host a launch party for their publication that is for creatives, or we have space for rental. So like if you're a nonprofit and you need to like do a training or have a holiday party or a meeting, you can rent space from us for that. So we try to be a kind of community resource, and also, we're trying to make tools and technology accessible to everyone.
That's great. It's resources are really, really important, because I think you can have great ideas. You can have people that are really DIY, but if you're unable to actually get to some of these things, you don't know how far or where your interests may lie. I think just being exposed to something, it opens it up. I wanted to get into woodwork briefly when I was there. So yeah, just gonna put the microphone down for a little bit and get to the wood.
Mm-hmm. You should do it.
I may. I don't think my partner's going to allow it. She's like, look, you can't get into your old man things. I was like, what do you mean? She was like, you talked about making beer and scotch recently. I was like, all right, fine, whatever. I'm making wood. So I got some rapid fire questions for you. They're simple questions. And essentially it's more, it's an additional thing to give like a background on you, or basically how your thinking goes. I'll just start throwing them out there, and they're pretty much whatever your answer is your answer. So if you're like, look, I said what I said, this is what I like. All right. What is your most important tool as a creator? I know I'll preface this by, I had a painter be a dick and say, paint, of course. I was like, I don't like you. But what would be that tool for you as a creator?
I would like to say nothing, because I think my favorite thing to do is make something out of nothing. I think, the absence of has always kind of inspired creativity for me.
Okay. Name a visionary. And you don't have to provide any extra context, by the way, if you don't want to.
Okay. Adrienne Marie Brown.
What is the last song you listened to?
I don't know a song specifically, but I've been listening to the BBE playlist on Spotify, which is Bad Bitch Energy.
That's legitimate.
So,
legitimate.
Some Meg Thee Stallion, something or other, probably.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. Describe yourself in 3 emojis.
Definitely crying, laughing emoji. Probably. The arm.
The flex?
I think. Yep, the flex one. And the celebration emoji.
Yes. This is the last one I have, and this is finish this sentence. Without art, blank.
I'd be boring.
Well, thank you. That was great. That was that rapid fire for you. So this is the last request I have for you. More of an invitation, if you will. Where can I find folks that are listening to this podcast, find you online? Kind of shamelessly plug website, all of that good stuff. And thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I am on the gram. That is the most active place that I post content. I have 2 Instagram accounts. AD Lou is like my art and my life. But I also have Do It AD Lou. And that is me documenting all of my my athleticism. But a lot of fun. I've been doing circus stuff and running and all that good stuff. So yeah. And then my website is aprildaniellelewis.com. And I would encourage any and everyone to come by and check out Openworks. We do in-person tours twice a week. We'd love to see you and show you around and let you be inspired.
Well, thank you. So there you have it, folks, for the great, I'm going to stick with that. I saw your face. The great April Danielle Lewis. I am Rob Lee, saying that there is art in and around your city. You just got to look for it.